Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice MLB slate with 7 games. This slate does start at 7 p.m., but most of the games are after 9, so do keep that in mind. Before I get started though, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? Man, we had some really big wins yesterday, so I really hope we can continue that again. We've been on fire to start the season with 3 straight wins, so hopefully we can continue that. Uh, this slate does feature some rough pitching. That's going to be annoying today, though they aren't as pricey as they have been, so that does help as well. But we don't have a lot of value when it comes to the pitching. But the good news is we have a lot of value in the bats, and we do have some teams that have some upside from a stackability perspective as well. So, and as they're also cheap teams. So one team that I do like to stack today is Detroit. Another one I like is St. Louis and Boston. Those are obviously kind of contrarian stacks typically, but they do have good matchups here, and so they definitely draw some potential. I also like the Yankees, the Dodgers, and Arizona, but they are less as impressive today compared to past days, and these uh, small team stacks are actually pretty interesting on this one. But we'll get into that. So let's go and get our pitchers first. And pitching is really rough from top to bottom. There's not really any pitcher that if there's other options that I would use on the slate. But you know we're not at the in our ace pitching rotation right now, so we're gonna have this but the pricing is a little bit high for the top guys, which I do find have some potential today, but they're definitely risky. I'll talk about them now. So we'll look at McKenzie for Cleveland. Now Cleveland has a higher scoring game, or sorry, a lower scoring game for this matchup. Sorry, for this slate, and that does give them some upside. It's also one of the games that uh, it's kind of a split on which team is going to win. Most of the games have a little bit better split from that perspective on this particular slate. So I do think McKenzie draws some potential here. He also has the best potential strikeout rate on the slate, so that does give him some upside as well. I think he'll get 6 or 7 strikeouts in this matchup. So if that's the case, then he'll definitely be somebody that will likely pay off. But he has uh, not played a whole lot in last season, so we do have to be a little bit careful with him. So he's not going to be somebody I'm going to use in every single lineup, but he's definitely somebody that I'm going to use in my core lineup. Looking at Paxton for the Dodgers, he also draws some good metrics here. Now, the Dodgers are favored to win this game pretty easily, and it has a pretty good total. I don't think San Francisco is going to be too much of a factor on the slate, as I think Paxton has good enough stuff and is probably the best pitcher available on the slate as a whole. And he has the best, second best strikeout rate and the second best, or the best actual runs against for this game. So I think he's going to have some potential here. He should be pretty highly usage, some pretty high usage here, but you do have to remember that he does have a low floor, and he sometimes meets that on certain occasions. I don't think it'll be today, but I do like his upside here, and his price is still okay. Then we'll look at Tanner Hoke. Now he's a good contrarian option off the top 2 guys. The matchup is not bad, but his strikeout rate is lower than the other top 2 guys, and I typically like that strikeout rate to be more impressive and more important. Oakland does have a couple guys that can get hits off him, but honestly, I think Oakland's going to struggle here, and he's probably a little bit safer than McKenzie just from the fact that the matchup here. But I do think that he doesn't have the strikeout rate, so that's going to hurt him a little bit. And I think using Paxton and either McKenzie or Hoke is definitely a way to go. But if you wanted to go value, I'm just going to mention Sean Manaea against Detroit, but that's still risky because I still like Detroit as a team today. I also like John Boyle a little bit for Oakland against Boston, though they do have some bats on Boston that I do like as well. Um, Otherwise, the slate is pretty rough pitching wise. I mean, it's pretty rough top to bottom to begin with, but those are kind of the 2 value plays you could kind of look at. Overall, though, on the slate, if we look at the totals, the New York Yankees Arizona game has a very high uh, total here with 10 runs, and both those teams are quite stackable today because both the pitchers here for this game feature a pretty high total. So I think this is probably my favorite 2 teams to stack. But I do like a Detroit stack. I also do like a St. Louis stack a little bit. So those 2 teams also have some upside as well. So let's get into this one. I also mentioned that the Detroit New York Mets game has the lowest uh, uh, temperature at 50 degrees, at their stadium today, so do keep that in mind. Whereas the Toronto-Houston game is their warmest. So do also keep that in mind. Obviously, some of these have domes, so Toronto does, or Houston does have a dome, so it's not likely that the weather will be a matter there. But that Detroit New York Mets game will be outside, so we should have that could influence that game a little bit. All the other games are around 60 degrees uh, outside. So looking at our catchers, we're going to start with this position. There are two far and away best choices at this spot. Both teams' catchers can stack with their respective teams as well, so that's definitely some way to go today. Wilson Contreras for St. Louis. He's my favorite catcher. He's not too expensive either. He's got a good upside today. The best hitting metrics, obviously. He does have some home run upside too, but it's not the best on the slate. But he definitely has some potential, especially with his low strikeout rate for this matchup. I think he's a viable option. And then we'll look at Rogers for Detroit. Now, I do like Rogers a lot. He's probably going to be my core catcher right now. He started the season a little bit rough, but I do think he's going to have some upside in this matchup. He's also got the home run potential for this slate, and he's cheap, and that definitely helps as well. He's going to be decently owned in a Detroit stack, and I do think he's a viable option. Also consider Campazuna for San Diego, as he's got good metrics as well. Looking at first base here, we're going to start with looking at the fact that there's a lot of guys at this position that I like a lot. However, there's one guy I like a whole lot, and that is going to be Torkelson for Detroit. I think Detroit's going to be an interesting stack today, and they're going to be relatively popular. And so he's going to have some viable upside in this one. He's got good metrics and home run upside, and I do think he's clearing away the best option at this position. He's priced up, but he's not too expensive. Otani is the other option. Now he can play in outfield as well. Now Otani obviously is going to have big time upside every time he comes up to bat, so you do have to consider him here. But he's extremely expensive unless you pay down other places. It's going to be hard to roster him, or if you go cheap, or if you can go cheap at one of the pitching positions. But that's going to be hard to do today. You can also consider Pete Alonso, Goldschmidt, and Cronenworth today. However, those guys are very contrarian on the slate and a lot riskier. Looking at second base, I feel like this position is extremely deep today. You don't need to pay up today, as you can choose value play and pay up at other positions. Not much home run upside at all for the position, which makes it for a good place to go to value options. And we have quite a few today, so we'll start with Gorman for St. Louis. Now he draws some good metrics here. He does have the best metrics for the position, other than K rate, and as that's a little bit high for the slate, but he does have good upside and has some potential even for a home run, even though it's not the highest home run potential on the slate. Then we'll look at McNeil. Let's see, McNeil for the Mets. He's somebody I think has some utility today for the Mets. He's got a good matchup here, and he doesn't have that home run upside, but he does have solid hitting metrics, and he won't strike out much, and so he definitely has a good usage for the slate as well. Then we'll look at Valdez uh, for Boston, and if you go with the Boston's stack, then he would be somebody I would lock in here, as he's nice and cheap, but he doesn't have a lot of potential outside of that situation from that perspective. Then we'll look at Keith. Uh, let's see, Keith for Detroit. Now, Detroit, like I told you, is a kind of interesting stack today. Now, he definitely carries some risk here, but he has good metrics and he's had good AAA experience. I think he's somebody that I would consider in a Detroit stack, but he's not a must play by any stretch. He's just dirt cheap, though, and helps from that perspective. And then Kim for San Diego is somebody I tend to like in certain situations. This is one of them. He's been solid against St. Louis in the past. He's also a good hitter, so uh, most of the time, so he draws good metrics from that perspective. He's just a little bit more expensive uh, uh, than the other guys I mentioned already, but he has good upside in this matchup. He's a little bit safer just from his history perspective. Also consider Jimenez, Giloff, Torres, and Bogarts at this position as well. There's just a lot of good options here. Laying at third base, this position seems pretty rough today. It's kind of top heavy. Hopefully we can get some more stuff that opens up, but right now it looks kind of rough. Looking at third base, though, Devers is clear cut the best option. He's been good against he's been rough against Oakland in the past, excuse me, but he's usually pretty good on the road, so that does give him some potential. He also has a lot of home run upside for a position that really doesn't have much home run upside today, and so that's definitely something to take in consideration. Ibanez for Detroit is part of a Detroit stack. He's got really good metrics for this game. Obviously, uh, he's just a good value play in general. He's a clear option as he's dirt cheap and at a tough position. But he could also play in outfield too if you decide to go with Devers at third. You could also consider Verling for Detroit and then Machado and Arenado as well, as they both have some utility today. Looking at shortstops, this position is usually pretty rough, but it's actually got some good options today. I think there's two clear-cut options, and then we have a couple more options that are decent. The top option here is Trevor Story. Story has really good metrics for this game. He has not hit the ball well last season, but I do think this matchup is going to give him some upside. And he's had some. He started the season in the Grapefruit League really solid, so I think he's going to have some good metrics early in the year. He and Baez for Detroit are very good options for the slate, and then Baez is also nice and cheap, which definitely gives him some upside. Even though he doesn't have the best hitting metrics, he has them today, and that's what we like here. He's also got really good home run upside, and I think he's probably the best home run upside guy for this position. Then you could also look at Kim for San Diego, and then Win for St. Louis. Uh, Win is just a very cheap uh, value play for St. Louis, and he has some utility here. I think he's going to have some usage today, so he's definitely going to be somebody to consider. You could also consider, though, Bogarts, Linder, and Machado. Looking at outfielders, we have quite a few outfielders we can kind of pick and choose from today, but I do have a couple guys I like a lot. The top two being Aaron Judge and Juan Soto. Now, Judge has always got home run upside. He has a high strikeout rate, which is a concern here, but he's got the top home run metrics on the slate, and so he's definitely a viable option if you go with a lot of home run guys today. Looking at Soto, he's kind of a contrarian option off of Judge, but he's a little bit more expensive. He's also a little bit safer. Well, he does strike out a lot, but he doesn't strike out quite as much as Judge does, so he definitely has that home run upside as well. The K rate is a little bit better, and so that's where you look at it. Ibanez for Detroit, if you don't use him at third base, then you definitely could throw him in the outfield here, and so that gives him a lot of potential. I also like Canha from Detroit. I think he's got good metrics here. He's going to be used pretty well, and this is going to be a sneaky stack today because I think it looks really good on paper. The matchup is pretty good, so I think that Detroit is a team that a lot of guys don't always want to use, but they definitely have that potential today. Similar to Kansas City yesterday, even though I didn't really think Kansas City was going to do that. That's kind of what they have that situational potential. Looking at Jaron Duran for Boston, he's a good contrarian option to Canha, and he's got a good start of a Boston stack, though he definitely carries some risk here. But he's a good guy that has good potential in certain situations. Not a huge home run threat, though. Donovan for St. Louis is very interesting. If you go with the St. Louis stack, he's going to be somebody I would want to put in there. He's got good hitting metrics for this game and has a lot of upside at his price point. Nemo is an interesting spot for the Mets. I do typically like Nemo in certain situations, and this is a pretty good one for him. He's not my favorite play, but he definitely has some upside. His price is a little bit high, but he does have good home run upside on the slate as well. McNeil, who I mentioned already at third, he can also, or sorry, at second base, he can also play here in the outfield. And then Verling is a good value play. Let's see. Uh, how did I? I'm sorry, can't type. Verling for Detroit, he can also play at third base. He's got some utility as well in a stack, but he's a little bit riskier. With that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.